The recruitment station on Kepler 442b buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy lined up to join the Galactic Defense Coalition. Towering Zephyrians with their crystalline armor clinked as they moved, while sleek Vortani floated past in their environmental suits. The air hummed with energy weapons charging and the software of advanced targeting systems. In the corner of the massive hangar, a small group of humans stood quietly around a collection of what looked like museum pieces. Sergeant Marcus Chun adjusted his worn military cap and ran his weathered hand along the cold metal of their primary weapon. The other recruits had been staring at them for hours, and the whispers were getting louder. "Is that really what they brought?" a young Zephyrian officer asked his companion, pointing at the humans' equipment. "Those primitive projectile weapons." Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez pretended not to hear as she methodically cleaned the components of their Gatling gun. The massive six-barreled weapon sat on its tripod mount, looking ancient compared to the sleek plasma rifles and quantum disruptors surrounding them. Its brass casings gleamed dully in the hangar lights, and the hand crank on the side seemed almost comical next to the voice-activated smart weapons other species carried. "Attention, all recruits," boomed the voice of Commander Vextar, a massive Krellian whose four arms gestured dramatically as he spoke. "Today we begin our assessment trials. Each species will demonstrate their combat capabilities and tactical knowledge." The crowd shuffled into formation, with humans naturally gravitating toward the back. They had learned early in their galactic interactions that most species viewed them as the new kids, primitive mammals who had barely achieved faster-than-light travel when others had been exploring the stars for millennia. As the demonstrations began, the hangar filled with impressive displays of firepower. The Zephyrians showcased their crystal-powered beam weapons that could slice through reinforced titanium like butter. Their shots were precise, silent, and deadly. The Vortani followed with their gravitational pulse weapons that could crush targets from the inside out without leaving external damage. Even the peaceful Etherians demonstrated their sonic disruptors that could incapacitate enemies without permanent harm. When the humans' turn came, the chatter in the hangar died to curious murmurs. Sergeant Chun and his team of 5 soldiers wheeled their Gatling gun to the center of the demonstration area. The weapon looked massive and unwieldy compared to the elegant firearms that had preceded it. "Humans of Earth," Commander Vextar announced with barely concealed amusement in his translator's voice, "please demonstrate your combat capabilities." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. The humans had heard the jokes for weeks during their journey to the recruitment station. "Powder burners," some called them. "Metal throwers," said others. The more polite species simply referred to their weapons as kinetic projectile systems, with the kind of tone usually reserved for museum artifacts. Private Johnson, barely 19 and still intimidated by the alien technology around him, whispered to Rodriguez, "Lieutenant, maybe we should explain how it works first?" Rodriguez shook her head. "Let the weapon do the talking, soldier." The target range consisted of various materials meant to test different weapon types. Crystalline barriers for energy weapons, dense metal plates for projectile tests, and complex moving targets to assess accuracy and tracking capabilities. The humans positioned their Gatling gun facing a series of thick armor plates that had easily withstood the previous demonstrations. "That ancient contraption will barely scratch our training targets," scoffed Captain Zeiler, a Vortani officer whose species had been using energy weapons for over 3,000 years. "Humans still use chemical propulsion and metal projectiles." How quaint. The comment drew more laughter from the assembled aliens. Even the peaceful species seemed amused by humanity's apparent technological backwardness. The humans had brought what appeared to be a weapon from their planet's industrial age to compete with technology that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Sergeant Chun ignored the comments and focused on his equipment check. The Gatling gun was a modified M134 minigun, upgraded with human ingenuity, but still fundamentally the same design that had been devastating battlefields for over a century. Its 6 rotating barrels could fire 7.62 millimeters rounds at a rate of 4,000 rounds per minute. To the humans, it was a precision instrument of war. To everyone else in the hangar, it looked like a relic. "Whenever you're ready," Commander Vextar said, his tone suggesting he was eager to move on to more impressive demonstrations. Chen nodded to Rodriguez, who took her position at the gun's controls. The weapon's electric motor hummed to life, and the barrels began their slow rotation. The sound was different from anything else in the hangar, not the clean whine of charging energy cells or the subtle vibration of gravitational manipulators, but something raw and mechanical. "What is that noise?" asked a young Etherian, whose species' technology was so advanced it was nearly silent. "Primitive mechanical systems," explained an older Zephyrian. "They actually use moving parts to operate their weapons." How inefficient. As the barrels spun faster, the humans made final adjustments. The alien observers leaned forward with curious anticipation, expecting a disappointing show of sparks against the reinforced targets. Some had already started conversations about other topics, assuming the human demonstration would be brief and unremarkable. The Gatling gun reached full speed, its barrels now a blur of rotating metal. The sound had grown from a hum to a distinctive whirring that seemed to resonate through the hangar floor. Rodriguez's finger hovered over the firing mechanism, waiting for Chin's signal. "Fire," Chin said quietly. What happened next would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about human warfare. The first rounds erupted from the spinning barrels with a sound like thunder trapped in a metal box. The muzzle flash lit up the demonstration area in rapid, strobing bursts. But it was the impact that made every being in the hangar stop talking and stare in stunned silence. The armor plates that had easily deflected energy beams and gravitational pulses began to disintegrate under the relentless barrage of metal projectiles. Each bullet struck with kinetic force that the aliens' shields and armor were simply not designed to handle. Energy weapons heated and melted materials in predictable ways, but the Gatling gun's rounds punched through barriers like they were made of paper. The first target, a composite armor plate rated to withstand direct plasma strikes, developed a growing cluster of holes that quickly merged into a ragged opening. Metal fragments flew in all directions as the rounds continued their devastating work. The second target, designed to test gravitational weapons, simply came apart under the mechanical violence of the projectile storm. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. She traversed the gun across the entire target range, demonstrating not just its destructive power, but its versatility. Moving targets that had dodged energy beams were shredded by the wall of bullets that seemed to fill every possible escape route. Complex barriers designed to deflect or absorb various types of energy simply crumbled under the physical impact of hundreds of metal projectiles per second. The sound was overwhelming, not just the firing, but the impact. Metal striking metal, concrete exploding, barriers collapsing. It was chaos incarnate, mechanical violence on a scale that the other species had never considered possible. Their weapons were precise, elegant, efficient. This was something else entirely. When Rodriguez finally released the firing mechanism, the sudden silence felt almost oppressive. Smoke drifted across the demonstration area, carrying the acrid smell of burned propellant and hot metal. The targets that remained standing were so damaged they barely resembled their original forms. The alien observers stood in complete silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. The humans' primitive weapon had not only matched the performance of advanced energy systems, it had exceeded them in raw destructive capability. Commander Vextar was the first to speak, his four arms gesturing in what his species used to indicate confusion. That was unexpected. Captain Zyler's earlier mockery had evaporated. The Vortani officer floated closer to examine the destroyed targets, his environmental suit's sensors working to analyze the damage patterns. "The kinetic energy transfer is remarkable," he admitted grudgingly. "But surely this is not practical in real combat situations." Sergeant Chin stepped forward, his voice calm and professional. "This is a standard infantry support weapon, sir. We have smaller versions for individual soldiers and much larger ones for vehicle and ship mounting." "Individual soldiers carry weapons like this?" asked the young Zephyrian who had first mocked their equipment. "Smaller versions, yes. Every human infantry unit has multiple automatic weapons, plus grenades, rockets, and other kinetic systems." The implications began to sink in among the alien observers. While they had developed sophisticated energy weapons that required significant power sources and complex targeting systems, humans had perfected the art of throwing metal very fast and very accurately. It was primitive in concept, but devastatingly effective in practice. "But the ammunition requirements must be enormous," protested an Etherian logistics officer. Energy weapons draw from rechargeable power cells. Private Thompson, who had been quiet until now, couldn't suppress a grin. Sir, we brought enough ammunition to fire continuously for 6 hours. And that's just what we could carry on foot. The hangar erupted in surprised chatter as the aliens tried to comprehend a military doctrine based on carrying thousands of individual projectiles rather than depending on power generation and distribution systems. It was like discovering that while they had been perfecting the art of painting with light, humans had mastered the technique of carving with hammers. But the real shock was yet to come. As the recruits began to disperse for the next phase of assessment, word spread quickly through the station's communication networks. Within hours, every commander and tactical analyst in the Galactic Defense Coalition would be requesting detailed reports on human weapons capabilities. The humans, for their part, seemed remarkably calm about the attention their demonstration had attracted. They methodically cleaned their weapon, recorded ammunition expenditure, and prepared for whatever came next with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested this level of destruction was simply routine for them. As night fell over the recruitment station, beings from dozens of worlds found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about warfare, technology, and the new species that had just joined their coalition. The humans might be primitives, but they were primitives who had turned the simple concept of throwing rocks into a science that could apparently overwhelm the most advanced defenses in the galaxy. In the human quarters, Sergeant Chun sat cleaning his sidearm, another primitive projectile weapon that now seemed far more significant than it had that morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy was about to learn what humans had known for centuries. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when you perfect them beyond all reasonable limits. 3 months after the recruitment demonstration, the Galactic Defense Coalition faced its first major crisis. The Void Reapers, a hostile alien force from beyond the galactic rim, had begun systematic attacks on outer colony worlds. Their technology was unlike anything the Coalition had encountered, adaptive shields that learned to counter energy weapons within minutes, and armor that seemed to regenerate faster than most weapons could damage it. The emergency briefing room on the Coalition flagship buzzed with desperate energy as commanders from dozens of species tried to find solutions. Holographic displays showed the grim statistics: 17 colonies lost, millions of beings evacuated or killed, and Coalition forces suffering devastating losses in every encounter. Our plasma cannons are effective for approximately 43 seconds before their adaptive shielding neutralizes the frequency, reported Admiral Kethmore, her tentacled form coiled around the command podium. Gravitational weapons last slightly longer, but the result is the same. Commander Vextar, who had overseen the human recruitment, gestured with his 4 arms at the tactical displays. Every weapon system we've developed over the past 1,000 years becomes useless within minutes of engagement. The Void Reaper's technology learns and adapts faster than we can modify our attacks. The assembled commanders murmured agreements and shared their own failed encounters. The Zephyrian crystal weapons, the Vortani gravity manipulators, the Etherian sonic disruptors, all had proven ineffective against an enemy that could apparently evolve countermeasures in real time. In the back of the briefing room, the human delegation sat quietly. Sergeant Chun had been promoted to lieutenant colonel after the recruitment incident, and now commanded a full battalion of human soldiers. Beside him sat Major Rodriguez and a handful of other human officers, all listening intently to the dire reports. Perhaps we should consider withdrawal to the inner systems, suggested Captain Zeiler, the Vortani officer who had once mocked human weapons. Establish a defensive perimeter and hope their expansion stops. Unacceptable, Admiral Kethmore replied firmly. The Void Reapers have shown no signs of slowing their advance. Every day we delay means more worlds fall. Then, what do you suggest? Asked the Etherian representative, her translated voice carrying the weight of her species' pacifist philosophy being challenged by necessity. All eyes turned toward the human section of the room. During the 3 months since recruitment, human forces had been quietly integrated into coalition units, but they had not yet seen actual combat. The other species had been curious about their performance, but assumed that while human weapons might be impressive in demonstrations, they would face the same adaptation problems as everyone else's technology. Colonel Chun stood slowly, his weathered face serious as he studied the tactical displays. With respect, Admiral, I'd like to volunteer my battalion for the next engagement. The room fell silent. The idea of sending the coalition's most primitive forces against an enemy that had defeated their most advanced technology seemed like suicide. Colonel Chun, Admiral Kethmore said carefully, the Void Reaper's adaptive capabilities are beyond anything we've encountered. Your kinetic weapons, while impressive, will likely face the same neutralization as our energy systems. Maybe, Chun replied calmly. But there's one thing about our weapons that might work in our favor. They don't use any exotic physics or energy signatures that can be analyzed and countered. They're just metal moving very fast. Major Rodriguez stood to join her commander. Admiral, human military doctrine is built around the assumption that the enemy will adapt to our tactics. We've been fighting adaptive enemies for our entire history, other humans. We know how to stay ahead of countermeasures. The alien commanders exchanged uncertain glances. The concept was foreign to them. Their advanced civilizations had developed such superior technology that adaptation had rarely been necessary. Wars were won by having better energy weapons or more sophisticated targeting systems, not by constantly evolving tactics against equals. The Void Reapers have taken the Kepler 438 system, Admiral Kethmore announced after consulting with her staff. 3 mining worlds with significant infrastructure. If you're willing to attempt an assault, we can provide support vessels and orbital cover. We'll take it, Chin said immediately. Colonel, interrupted Captain Zeiler. This isn't a training exercise. The Void Reaper forces in that system destroyed an entire Zephyrian battle group last week. Chin's expression didn't change. Then, they're probably not expecting projectile weapons and chemical explosives. 48 hours later, the human assault force approached Kepler 438b aboard coalition transport ships. The planet's surface showed the scars of Void Reaper occupation. Geometric structures had sprouted across the landscape like metallic fungus, and the atmosphere crawled with their patrol craft. In the transport's cargo bay, human soldiers made final preparations for planetfall. The scene would have been familiar to any military historian from Earth. Soldiers checking weapons, adjusting equipment, and maintaining the calm focus that preceded combat. What made it remarkable was that it was happening in space, surrounded by alien technology, preparing to fight enemies that existed outside known physics. Corporal Jackson, a young soldier from Detroit, ran his hands along his M4 carbine for the 10th time. Lieutenant, you really think these bullets are going to work against shields that stop plasma beams? Lieutenant Martinez, who had joined the unit after the recruitment demonstration, checked his own weapons ammunition load. Jackson, remember what happened to those armor plates during our demo? Energy weapons heat things up, melt them, disintegrate them neat and clean. Bullets punch holes and keep going. Sometimes simple is better than sophisticated. The transport shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small windows, the human soldiers could see Void Reaper aircraft rising to meet them, sleek, angular craft that seemed to bend light around their edges. 30 seconds to drop, called the pilot over the intercom. The human soldiers stood and checked their gear one final time. Each carried a standard assault rifle, multiple magazines of ammunition, grenades, explosives, and enough supplies for extended combat operations. Compared to the elegant energy weapons of their coalition allies, they looked like warriors from a more primitive age. The drop doors opened, and the humans fast roped down onto the planet's surface under covering fire from coalition ships. The moment their boots hit alien soil, everything changed. The first Void Reaper patrol encountered the humans 15 minutes after landing. The alien creatures were unlike anything in the coalition databases, constantly shifting forms that seemed part machine and part living tissue, with weapon systems that emerged from their bodies like organic growths. The patrol's adaptive shields activated immediately when they detected the approaching humans, cycling through the energy frequencies of every coalition weapon they had previously encountered. But when Corporal Jackson opened fire with his M4, something unprecedented happened. The bullets simply punched through the shields as if they weren't there. The Void Reaper's adaptive technology, designed to counter energy weapons and exotic particles, had no framework for dealing with simple kinetic projectiles. The shields could learn to deflect plasma, absorb gravitational pulses, and neutralize sonic attacks, but they couldn't adapt to chunks of metal moving at high velocity. The first Void Reaper went down under a burst of rifle fire, its adaptive systems frantically trying to analyze and counter an attack based on 19th century physics applied with 21st century precision. Target down, Jackson reported calmly, already moving to engage the next enemy. The entire firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 6 Void Reapers lay motionless on the rocky ground, their adaptive shields still cycling uselessly through energy frequencies while bullet holes leaked strange fluids from their forms. Lieutenant Martinez keyed his radio. "Command, this is Ground Team Alpha. First contact successful. Enemy shields are ineffective against kinetic weapons." The response from the Coalition fleet orbiting overhead was immediate and astonished. "Repeat that, Ground Team Alpha. Did you say ineffective?" "Confirmed. Bullets go right through their shields like they're not even there." Word spread quickly through the Coalition forces as human units across the planet reported similar successes. The Void Reapers, invincible against advanced energy weapons, were being systematically destroyed by soldiers using technology their enemies' systems couldn't even recognize as weapons. But the real revelation came when human forces encountered Void Reaper heavy units. Massive constructs the size of buildings that had previously required entire battle groups to engage. The Coalition expected these encounters to reveal the limitations of kinetic weapons against truly massive enemies. Instead, they witnessed something that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. Master Sergeant Williams and his heavy weapons team had set up their position on a ridge overlooking a Void Reaper staging area. Below them, 3 of the massive enemy constructs were assembling what appeared to be an invasion force for the next planet in the system. "Range, 800 meters, Williams called to his team. "Target the center construct first." His weapon was a .50 caliber heavy machine gun, essentially a scaled-up version of the rifles the infantry carried. To human thinking, it was a logical progression. If regular bullets worked against shields, bigger bullets would work better against bigger targets. The first burst from the heavy machine gun struck the massive Void Reaper construct center mass. The armor that had previously shrugged off concentrated plasma cannon fire began to buckle and crack under the relentless hammering of large-caliber projectiles. The construct's regeneration systems, designed to repair energy damage by rebuilding destroyed molecular bonds, had no mechanism for dealing with physical trauma. Energy weapons removed material cleanly, allowing for systematic reconstruction. Bullets tore ragged holes that disrupted the regeneration patterns and created cascading failures throughout the self-repair matrix. Within minutes, the first construct collapsed in a shower of sparks and strange fluids. The other 2 turned to engage the humans, their weapon systems charging with the distinctive glow of high-energy plasma. But Williams had trained for this scenario. "Spread out. Make them work for their targets." The human team scattered across the ridgeline, using natural cover and movement to avoid the plasma strikes while maintaining accurate fire on the remaining constructs. It was a tactic as old as warfare itself: mobility and cover to survive, concentrated fire to kill. The Void Reapers had never faced an enemy that used such primitive tactics combined with weapons their technology couldn't counter. Their systems, designed for the elegant battles of advanced civilizations, had no protocols for dealing with opponents who hid behind rocks and shot back with chemical-powered projectiles. The second construct fell to concentrated heavy machine gun fire, its adaptive systems overwhelmed by damage they couldn't analyze or counter. The third attempted to flee but was destroyed by a rocket-propelled grenade, another human weapon that the Void Reaper's technology had no framework to understand or defend against. As reports poured in from human units across the planet, a stunning picture emerged. The Void Reapers, who had adapted to and defeated every advanced weapon system in the Coalition arsenal, were being systematically destroyed by human forces using technology that predated spaceflight. The implications rippled through the Coalition fleet as commanders tried to understand how their most primitive allies had succeeded where their most advanced forces had failed. The answer was both simple and profound. Sometimes the best way to defeat a sophisticated enemy is with something so simple they never prepared for it. By the end of the first day, human forces had cleared 3 major Void Reaper installations and captured significant amounts of enemy technology for analysis. The planet that had been written off as lost was being systematically liberated by soldiers using weapons their enemies' systems couldn't even recognize as threats. In the command bunker that evening, Colonel Chun received congratulations from commanders across the coalition. The same officers who had mocked human weapons months earlier now asked detailed questions about ammunition supplies and deployment tactics. How long can your forces maintain this pace of operations? Admiral Kethmore asked during the evening briefing. Chun checked his reports and smiled grimly. Admiral, we've used less than 5% of our ammunition reserves. At this rate, we can maintain continuous combat operations for weeks. The alien commanders exchanged glances that mixed respect with bewilderment. Their energy weapons required complex power management and careful resource allocation. The humans apparently carried enough simple ammunition to fight a war of attrition that could last months. But the most important realization was yet to come. As intelligence teams analyzed captured Void Reaper technology, they discovered that the aliens' adaptive systems were so sophisticated they could eventually counter human weapons too. The difference was time. It would take weeks or months instead of minutes. For the first time since the war began, the coalition had found an enemy weakness they could exploit. The question now was whether they could press their advantage before the Void Reapers adapted to this new threat. The answer would determine the fate of the galaxy. 6 weeks after the first successful engagement at Kepler, for 38, the war had transformed dramatically. Human forces, now spread across a dozen worlds, continued their devastating effectiveness against Void Reaper forces. But intelligence reports brought troubling news. The enemy was adapting. On the coalition flagship, Admiral Kethmore studied the latest tactical analyses with growing concern. The holographic displays showed Void Reaper installations with new defensive configurations, thicker armor, different movement patterns, and what appeared to be experimental countermeasures specifically designed for kinetic weapons. The enemy adaptation rate has accelerated, reported Dr. Vexmanal, the coalition's chief xenobiologist. Initial analysis suggests they're beginning to develop kinetic-resistant materials and deployment strategies designed to minimize exposure to human weapons. Colonel Chun, now wearing the insignia of the coalition's first human general, nodded grimly as he reviewed the reports. How long do our intelligence teams estimate before they develop effective countermeasures? Conservative estimate? 3 to 4 months before partial effectiveness. 6 months for complete adaptation, Admiral Kethmore replied. The question is whether we can end this war before that timeline expires. The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. The coalition had finally found a way to hurt the Void Reapers, but that advantage was temporary. Traditional military thinking suggested they needed to press their attack immediately, strike hard while they maintained superiority, and hope to achieve victory before the enemy adapted. General Chin stood and walked to the tactical display, studying the distribution of Void Reaper forces throughout the galaxy. The enemy had spread across hundreds of worlds, establishing manufacturing bases and resource extraction operations on a scale that suggested long-term occupation rather than simple conquest. With respect, Admiral, Chin said quietly, I think we're approaching this wrong. The assembled alien commanders turned toward him with expressions of confusion. Captain Zyler, now one of Chin's most vocal supporters, leaned forward. General, our window of advantage is closing rapidly. Surely rapid deployment of maximum force is our only viable strategy. Chin shook his head. That's thinking like them. Like us, I mean. Like advanced civilizations that develop single solutions to problems and then optimize them until they're perfect. Major Rodriguez, recently promoted to colonel, understood immediately where her commander was heading. Sir, are you suggesting we don't try to win before they adapt? I'm suggesting we adapt faster. The concept hit the alien commanders like a physical blow. Their civilizations had spent millennia perfecting their technologies until they reached near-perfect efficiency. The idea of deliberately staying ahead of an adaptive enemy through constant change was foreign to their strategic thinking. Dr. Vexminal's tentacles writhed in agitation. General Chun, with respect, constant technological evolution requires enormous resources and research time. How could we possibly out-adapt an enemy whose systems can counter new threats within minutes? Chin's weathered face broke into a grin that made several alien officers unconsciously step back. Doctor, you're still thinking about this like your people would. You want to develop new technology to solve the problem. We already have the technology, we just need to use it differently. He turned to the tactical display and began manipulating the holographic controls with the casual efficiency of someone who had spent months learning alien interfaces. Every human weapon system we've deployed has dozens of variants. Different ammunition types, different deployment configurations, different tactical applications. We don't need to invent new weapons. We need to use the ones we haven't shown them yet. The first demonstration of this philosophy came 3 days later on Kepler 452c, where a major Void Reaper manufacturing complex had begun producing what appeared to be kinetic-resistant armor plating. Coalition intelligence suggested the installation would be impregnable to human small arms within weeks. Instead of the expected frontal assault, human forces implemented what they called tactical flexibility. First, long-range sniper teams equipped with .50 caliber rifles engaged targets from distances beyond the Void Reaper's previous experience with human weapons. The enemy's adaptive systems, calibrated for the engagement ranges they had encountered in earlier battles, were unprepared for precision fire from over a mile away. While the Void Reapers adjusted their defenses for long-range engagement, human mortar teams began indirect fire attacks. The enemy had never encountered projectiles that flew high trajectories to strike from above, and their shield systems were configured for direct fire weapons. High explosive shells rained down on installations designed to resist bullets and energy beams, but not aerial bombardment. As the Void Reapers adapted their overhead defenses, human combat engineers detonated carefully placed explosive charges that had been infiltrated into the facility during the confusion of the other attacks. The enemy's systems, focused on countering external threats, had no protocols for dealing with internal explosions using chemical compounds they couldn't analyze or predict. But the most devastating surprise came when the Void Reapers finally adapted to all the human variants they had encountered. Just as their systems achieved what they calculated was complete countermeasure efficiency, human forces revealed weapons that had never appeared in previous engagements. Flamethrowers. The psychological impact on coalition observers was almost as significant as the tactical effectiveness. Here were humans deploying weapons that literally threw fire at their enemies. Technology so primitive it predated gunpowder, yet so unexpected that the Void Reaper's sophisticated adaptation systems had no framework to counter it. The flames didn't trigger energy weapon protocols because they weren't concentrated energy beams. They didn't activate kinetic defenses because the burning fuel wasn't solid projectiles. The Void Reaper's adaptive systems simply had no category for liquid fire propelled by chemical pressure, and responded with confused attempts to cycle through countermeasures that didn't apply. Colonel Rodriguez led the flamethrower assault personally, her team moving through Void Reaper positions like vengeful spirits from humanity's most primitive nightmares. The enemy's regeneration systems, designed to repair precise energy damage or kinetic trauma, couldn't cope with the chaotic molecular destruction of sustained burning. Target neutralized, Rodriguez reported calmly as another Void Reaper installation collapsed in flames behind her. Moving to next objective. The manufacturing complex that intelligence had predicted would be impregnable fell within 18 hours. More importantly, intercepted Void Reaper communications showed their adaptive systems struggling to analyze and counter the bewildering variety of human weapons and tactics. Word of the victory spread quickly through coalition forces, but it also reached human commanders on other worlds who began implementing their own variations of the tactical flexibility doctrine. The results exceeded even optimistic projections. On Gliese 667cc, human forces revealed another surprise: chemical weapons. Tear gas and smoke grenades might seem trivial compared to plasma cannons, but they were devastatingly effective against enemies whose sensors and adaptive systems were designed for energy signatures and kinetic impacts, not chemical irritants. The Void Reaper's life support systems, perfectly calibrated for their atmospheric requirements, had no protocols for filtering chemical agents they had never encountered. Their adaptive technology could counter weapons, but couldn't instantly evolve biological immunity to foreign toxins. Major Thompson led his chemical warfare specialists through Void Reaper positions while the enemy stumbled blindly through clouds of tear gas, their sophisticated sensors useless, and their adaptive systems frantically cycling through electromagnetic countermeasures that had no effect on simple chemical compounds. But the real breakthrough came when human forces began combining all their tactics simultaneously. The Void Reaper's adaptation systems, designed to find single solutions to single threats, couldn't cope with multiple, constantly changing attack methods deployed in rapid succession. A typical human assault now began with long-range sniper fire to trigger long-distance defensive adaptations. Then, mortar bombardment forced overhead defensive configurations. Chemical weapons deployment caused environmental system adaptations. Finally, when the enemy's systems were locked into multiple simultaneous countermeasures, close assault teams with flamethrowers and explosives could penetrate defenses that were optimized for entirely different threats. The Void Reaper's technology, perfect for adapting to single evolving threats, was overwhelmed by the chaos of constantly shifting human tactics. Their systems couldn't predict what variant would appear next because the humans themselves were improvising new combinations faster than analysis could keep pace. General Chun received reports from across the galaxy that painted an astonishing picture. Human forces, initially dismissed as primitives with outdated weapons, were systematically dismantling Void Reaper installations using tactics so varied and unpredictable that the enemy's primary advantage, adaptation, had become a liability. How many different weapon variants do human forces actually possess? Admiral Kethmore asked during a strategic planning session. Chin consulted with his staff officers before responding. Admiral, that's actually the wrong question. We don't have different weapons. We have different ways of using the same basic principles. Chemical propulsion, kinetic impact, controlled explosions, and thermal effects. But we can combine and deploy these principles in more configurations than any adaptive system could catalog. The alien officers struggled to understand the concept. Their civilizations had optimized single solutions until they achieved near perfection. Humans had apparently optimized the art of staying unpredictable. Dr. Vex Minal reviewed the tactical analyses with visible confusion. General Chun, your forces seem to be deliberately avoiding optimal efficiency in favor of tactical unpredictability. This approach defies every principle of strategic optimization. Doctor, Chin replied with a smile, optimal efficiency is predictable. Predictable gets you killed when you're fighting someone who adapts to whatever you do. We learned a long time ago that sometimes good enough, done differently every time, beats perfect done the same way. The final phase of the war began when human forces revealed their ultimate tactical innovation. They stopped using their most effective weapons and deliberately returned to less efficient variants in different combinations. Just when the Void Reaper's systems finally began adapting to flamethrowers and chemical weapons, human forces switched back to rifles and machine guns, but deployed them in patterns completely different from their initial engagements. The enemy's adaptive systems, having evolved countermeasures for human weapons as they first encountered them, were suddenly facing the same weapons used in entirely different tactical configurations. Their adaptation protocols, designed to improve efficiency by building on previous experience, became confused by weapons they had solved being used in ways that bypassed their solutions. The psychological effect on Void Reaper forces was devastating. Their technology, their greatest strength, had become unreliable. They never knew which human tactic they would face next, and their adaptive systems couldn't keep up with the rate of change. The war's end came not with a final battle, but with a gradual collapse of Void Reaper resistance. As their forces withdrew from contested worlds rather than face human attacks they could no longer predict or counter. Their retreat accelerated when human forces began following up successful assaults with completely different tactics designed to prevent the enemy from learning patterns even from their defeats. In the aftermath, as coalition forces surveyed liberated worlds and captured Void Reaper technology, the galaxy found itself forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about warfare, technology, and the nature of advancement itself. The most sophisticated adaptive systems ever encountered had been defeated not by superior technology, but by opponents who refused to let their tactics become predictable. The Void Reapers had spent their existence learning to counter the best their enemies could do. They had never faced enemies whose philosophy was built around never doing their best the same way twice. General Chin stood in the observation deck of the Coalition flagship, looking out at stars that were once again free from Void Reaper occupation. Beside him, Admiral Kethmore reviewed reports that would reshape galactic military doctrine for centuries to come. General, the Admiral said quietly, your species has taught us something we never considered. We believed advancement meant perfecting solutions. You've shown us that sometimes advancement means perfecting the art of staying imperfect. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Admiral, there's an old human saying, if it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid. We just applied that to an entire war. The human forces began their journey home to Earth, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again underestimate the power of primitive weapons wielded by minds that refused to be predictable. The Gatling gun that had first announced humanity's arrival in galactic warfare had become a symbol not of humanity's technological limitations, but of their greatest strength, the ability to find new ways to use old solutions. In the end, the galaxy had learned that sometimes the most advanced response to sophisticated problems is elegant simplicity applied with relentless creativity. The humans had won not by being better than their enemies, but by being impossible to figure out.